Hi there, I'm Winifred Costello, owner and magical entrepreneur of AwenTree. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about creating sacred space for your tarot readings. This is a question I got from one of my students, and it's a great question. So that's what today's video is going to focus on. So I think the first thing to consider when you are creating sacred space for where you'll be reading tarot cards is to consider where you'll be reading. You may be reading out of your home, maybe at your kitchen table, or perhaps you have a home office. You could be reading out of a dedicated tarot reading space, such as, again, like an office space that you have, or maybe you have a shared space with another practitioner, or you may be going into a shop where they have a reading room all set up for you. You might also be reading out of settings where you have less control, such as a coffee shop. And that's an option, and you definitely want to going to check with the coffee shop and make sure that you're not stepping on any toes if you are reading there. Some coffee shops don't have any problem based on the setup of the shop. There might be a quiet corner where you can actually quietly and discreetly meet with a client and give a reading, but you're definitely going to want to make sure that you're not stepping on any business toes, setting up and doing a reading in a business like that without first checking out if it's going to be okay. So I do recommend that you do scope that out first if you are going to a public setting like a coffee shop. And then lastly, you could be at a venue such as like a psychic fair, where you may not even know. It could be a psychic fair, it could be a festival, or some sort of outdoor setting where you really don't know what you're going to encounter ahead of time. So first you're going to want to think about where you are going to be ending up reading. And you may be reading in several of these locations if you don't have a dedicated space. Even if you have a dedicated space, actually, you may find yourself reading at psychic fairs or festivals or a wellness event, like a health expo or something like that. So you want to be prepared and flexible for a lot of environments. So let's talk about these different environments. So obviously, if it's your own office space, or to some degree perhaps your home, you're going to have more control over how you set up the environment. And so that's going to give you a lot more freedom. And if you're setting up somewhere where you are a visiting reader and you're like, so let's say you are reading at a venue that has a reading room and you're not really allowed to make any changes. You just go in, you have access to the chairs and the table perhaps, and you're in, you do your readings and you go. You might have less control of elements that you could bring into the space. And if you're in an outdoor setting or a psychic fair, there could be even less control over the elements, but there's still things that you can do to make sure you're creating sacred space for your readings. So let's talk about, first off, for sure, first off, you want to make sure that you have as clean a space as possible. Now, if it's your office space or your kitchen, your home, or a venue, a dedicated reading room that you may have, you're definitely going to make sure that you keep it nice and clean and tidy and well organized. I always tell people that it's really important that all the energy and the elements in the space where you're doing the reading, everything needs to contribute to the energy of the reading. And ideally, nothing should detract from the energy of your reading. So we want to make sure that our space is tidy, it's clean, that we've thought about things like if you do have a bookshelf behind you, that the books are neatly stacked, or if you've got decorations, perhaps you have an altar, you still want to make sure that it has a concise appearance, not one that looks cluttered. That's important spiritually and energetically and psychically. We ideally don't want to read in a cluttered space. So first thing would be to make sure that the space is clean and that nothing in the space is detracting or distracting from your connection with your client and from the reading. That would be a first tip I would recommend. The next thing would be to think about functional things. So there's a lot of things to think about. So for an office space, do you have a table space? Maybe it's your own space or your kitchen table, and the amount of room you have on the table in front of you, these are funny things that one's going to want to think about, but you want to make sure you have enough room to actually lay out your cards and lay them out nicely and comfortably in a way where it's nice and clean and there's plenty of room to put down however many cards you want to put down in a spread. So you want to think from a functional level, what is the surface you'll be reading on? Now, in some venues, they provide a table for you, and in other venues, you need to provide your own table. Side tables are great for that. Like if you go get like a small, what we would call like a plant table or a window table. Sometimes, believe it or not, you can find wooden card tables, like those old-fashioned TV trays. The metal ones are not ideal for reading on, but you can find wooden TV trays still, and they can be really beautiful tables. That would be a great fold-up table you could bring for readings. You could look at tag sales, you could look in different stores, but you want like a small table that's easy to pack up and bring with you if you are in charge of bringing your own table. You want to make sure it's a nice sturdy table that's not going to easily be knocked over, and that's got a nice good surface for you to put your cards out on. That's important. Another thing to think about too is the element. What are you going to lay your cards out on? Are you going to put them directly out onto the table, or do you want to have like a nice piece of fabric? Now you can source your fabric from anywhere you want. You could sew something beautiful. You could pick something up beautiful from another person who sews lovely, magical, special items. But do you want to put your cards down on a beautiful piece of fabric, or do you want to directly put them down onto the table? Fabrics can be very beautiful, but also bear in mind that they can get caught and pulled on or blown by the wind. So you want to be sure you think about the nature of the fabric if you go that route, that they aren't going to get caught by someone's clothing or the sleeves of your shirt and pull the fabric and disrupt your reading. So keep that in mind when you are choosing your fabric for your readings. Another thing to think about, speaking of wind, is the weather. So you want to, if you are reading not indoors, say you're reading at a festival or some other outdoor venue, you want to think about the weather. Do you need a pop-up, a cover? Like, are there, even if it's sunny out, it could be too much sun. It could be windy, it could be rainy. You want to just be prepared for the unexpected. So you want to consider the weather, not only to protect you and your client and your cards, but also you don't want to get sunburned. You don't want your cards to blow away. Those things are definitely not going to contribute to the reading. So you want to think about these kind of unexpected elements as well. If you're reading in a home setting or somewhere where there's a pet, like a cat, I have 2 cats. They love to jump on my cards. So if I put cards down at home, one of my cats cannot resist it. She is drawn, as soon as the cards are out, she's drawn to them and wants to lay on them and roll on them. So you definitely want to think about things like, do you have a pet that might disrupt the reading? So you want to be prepared for that and have a game plan to manage that. And then something else to think about is the atmosphere. So is the atmosphere welcoming? How does it feel grounded? Does it feel calm? The atmosphere and the environment not only support you, the reader, they support the client. So as much as possible, you want to create a welcoming, inspired, safe atmosphere. Privacy is important. So some of these things get a little more complicated if you are not in your own office space. You may again have some limitations on the nature of the privacy, but there are a few things you can do. You can use lowered voices if you're speaking somewhere where, like say at a psychic fair, you could put your heads closer together and really make sure you speak directly to your client. Try to keep the sound from traveling. If you're in an office space and you find that you feel like the sound isn't as private, allowing, I don't know if that's the right words, but if you feel like the sound's traveling and you don't have the level of privacy you want, you might consider a sound box. But you want to think about the confidentiality and the privacy in the reading, that you want to preserve that as much as possible. Again, once we get into a psychic fair element where you may see many readers lined up, many readers in a row, that can get a little trickier. So you're going to want to try to pitch your voice lower and speak right directly to your client and try to minimize the voices carrying. So those are some things to consider. So back to the spiritual and welcoming energy, you might want to have some things, if you have more control over what you bring into the space, some ways that you can help create sacred space when you're doing readings is a beautiful cloth that you put your cards down. That really sets the tone in a nice way. You could think about crystals that you bring and put on the table. If it's somewhere where it's appropriate and safe to have a candle lit, you may have a candle. If you can't light a real candle, you could consider getting a really high quality electric light, one of those LED candles. There are really some great ones on the market now where the flame looks more authentic. It's not the same as a real flame, I understand, but sometimes there are restrictions on what can be, that open flames aren't allowed. Or if it was really windy and you couldn't control the candle being blown out. So an electric candle is a safe option and often allowed in many settings where an open flame is not. So that's don't overlook it as a potential item to add ambiance to your reading. Another thing to think about are any other elements, that a prop that makes you feel comfortable. You might want a bell, you might want pretty stones, anything that helps you feel magical, spiritual, inspired, that provides that same feeling for your clients, helps them feel grounded, inspired, connected, and like they are being held in a sacred space. That anything that contributes to creating that energy is perfect to bring into the space where you are reading. Again, just keep in mind that things are tidy, clean, dusted. You don't want dusty, like if you have something pretty crystals, you want to make sure they're dusted. You don't want to have like a film with dust on things. I know it sounds kind of crazy to believe, but you want to think about these things. So like if you do have items, you want to make sure that they're nice and clean and freshly washed and everything's been smudged or rinsed or charged with an energy or Reiki, but you want to make sure everything that is in your space is creating sacred space for your client. So just to recap today's video, we have been talking about creating sacred space for your tarot readings, and there's lots of things that you can do, from how you set the energy of the room, or crystals that you bring in, or a nice cloth, a sound box to help encourage the privacy. But there's lots of great tips in this video that you can go back through and listen to again and get some good ideas to get started in creating sacred space for your client. And the last thing I want to touch upon, I have touched upon this a little bit in another video, but just to close out, you want to also think about the energy of the room. And so if you are able to light sage or smudge or light incense, you can do that. That helps set the energy of the room. If you are not able to light sage, some places don't allow that, you could use an aromatherapy spray. That's a great way to set the energetic energy of the space or to clear the space. That's a fabulous thing. You could use sound like bells. If you have the voice for it, you could tone. You could use a singing bowl. All those things would help set the energetic energy to the space. And if you can't have any scent at all, some places are chemically sensitive and they're scent aware like that. You could use something I call like a blessed water. Now, when I mean that, I don't mean to sprinkle actual live water on your client or your cards. When I say use I mean create an aromatherapy mister with no scent, and just by putting blessed Reiki charged or moon charged water, like that the actual aromatherapy would have no aroma part. It would just have the blessed water, but you would still mist it just like you would mist an aromatherapy spray. But that would be a sacred energy you could bring into the space if you can bring any scent in. So I think that covers everything I can think of. Those are some good tips to get you going on how to create sacred space for your tarot readings. If you have any other questions along this line or on other things about tarot, I would love to hear about them from you. You can put them in the comment box. If this video was helpful for you, I'd love to hear how it helped you out with your readings. And I look forward to hearing from you in the comment box, and definitely share those questions with me for future videos I'll be making. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time to watch my video, and we'll talk soon. Have a great day.